Well, hello there. Again, I'm Alan Levine, and this is another episode of the OEWeek live show that we're doing during Open Education Week. I've lost count of how many that I've done, but they've all been exciting and quite fun. And this one is one I've been looking forward to all of them, but we have some really special things, especially for people interested in some cool technology and things that I think are important. And just to let you know, this is, of course, on YouTube, and anybody out there can send us questions. This will be archived like right away. And we just like this live format. It's going to be unstructured. And just want to say that, you get the credits for that music, but all my music I use is from the Free Music Archive, licensed Creative Commons. That was a tune called Free to Use by an artist named Ketsa, who has some great tracks in there. So with that, I'm going to bring on my two colleagues who I've known online and have never actually met. Do we call this meeting?
I think it qualifies. Sure.
Yeah.
That's good.
Excellent. So I'll say hello first to Paul Hibbets. And do you affiliate with Paul Hibbets Design or SFU? I'm not sure.
Okay, so kind of Hibbett's Design is more my common association, but long-term teaching computing science UI design at SFU for sure.
Excellent. And so I've been following Paul's work for a long time, and he's going to show you a really fascinating tool for turning basic, simple content into some beautifully presented web pages. That has a lot more to do with it than that, and we're going to see a lot of demos. And next, I have a Zach. I didn't even ask you, is it Krita or Krita or?
It's Krita. You got
Krita.
it on the first try. Yeah.
Excellent. Who I've gotten to know from his work on the Openverse team. I kind of lurk on the Slack, and I don't understand most of what's going there. But every now and then I ask a dumb question, and someone responds with, how does this work? And so I really am pleased that you're both here. And so we're going to talk about some technology. And so first, I'm going to main stage you, Zach, and we'll say, what is Openverse, and what's your role in it?
Cool. Well, yeah, let me first quickly say that I think all of our contributors are big fans of your lurking and your questions, Alan. So please continue to do so for the foreseeable future. But yeah, very briefly, my name is Zach Krita. I'm the team lead for the Openverse project, which you can find at openverse.org. And I work with a very diverse group of contributors, some of whom are sponsored by Automatic, others who are just, donating their time and efforts to the project to work on and build Openverse. A little history on Openverse. It's a project that began at Creative Commons. I'm sure an organization everyone's very familiar with. And it was an initiative internal to Creative Commons called CC Search, which people may have used before, which is really just designed to identify and catalog every single Creative Commons licensed work known to humanity on the web. It's a big undertaking. I think the latest numbers are that that's over 2.5 billion works, and I think there's soon to be new numbers coming out that probably suggests closer to 4 or 5. But I will say in CC Search, which was renamed to Openverse, we now have 700 million of those. So we'll be updating our homepage copy from 600 to 700. That happened quite recently.
And that includes audio, which is something that wasn't really in the original. Actually, the very original CC Search was basically an interface just to separate search engines, and you had to send your search to Google or Wikimedia, etc. And it's out there somewhere as an archive.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. Funnily enough, it's had Openverse added to it, so it can be found. There's not anywhere I can share text. Is there?
If you put it in the private chat, I will share it with everybody.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for nostalgia's sake, there's oldsearch.creativecommons.org, which is
that's brilliant.
Still serves as an index and a little portal. It's actually been updated fairly recently, and I think there's some intention to revitalize it a bit, just as a sort of hub, so folks can keep an eye out for that. But yeah, so essentially what happened is in 2021, Openverse joined the WordPress project and kind of left its home within Creative Commons. And yeah, myself and a handful of other folks were hired by Automatic to work on the project full time, devote development hours, design hours. And yeah, since then we've done things like introduce audio with the intention of adding other media types in the future. 3D models is the one we've been sitting on for a while, as really excited to jump into. But also ultimately things like any media fundamentally. The hardest thing we're trying to reconcile a bit is textual content, because theoretically we could have open education resources, things like that, but it's quite a big initiative to jump ourselves into. And I guess I could quickly click through Openverse and kind of show folks what it looks like, some information.
Yeah. And while Zach's getting set up, I'll say, like, the biggest advantage is, like, everything there is licensed under Creative Commons license. There's no guessing, like when you try Google or when you have to deal with the funny gray licenses of other services. And also when you find something, what I really appreciate, it gives you the cut and paste attribution, because giving attribution is one of my big banes. Because I think it's saying thank you. It's less or so like, oh, I have to because it's what the license says. It's nice to give credit to things.
Yeah, and I think one more thing I'll quickly mention that is probably my favorite thing about the project is that it's completely open source. So it's very rare. My background is in technology, and it's rare that there can be this sort of harmony between like the sort of the medium and the message. Like the way we work on it is aligned with the goals of the project, the sort of ethical standards of the project. It's all open all the way down, top to bottom. So it makes it very joyous to come into work every day.
And it's really for other understanding, you don't house the media. It's doing somewhat of a federated search, if that's right, or you're searching the metadata from many different collections.
Yeah. Some of those technical aspects are pretty astonishing. So I'll resist the temptation to get into them. I will mention at one time we were actually there's an organization that creates backups of the entire internet, and we were actually crawling those backups to find websites with high concentrations of links back to the Creative Commons website's license pages, which is just a very good heuristic for identifying, hey, there's probably a lot of open works on this site if they're linking to all these license pages. So that research was used to generate the initial list of potential sites, and then ultimately extract the information about all that media. But yeah, what we do now is we have a mixture of scraping and then using what are known as APIs, which is just essentially a way for websites to talk to each other. You go to a URL and it provides data instead of a visual page. And yeah, we communicate with a whole bunch of different sources to aggregate all of their media. So we're this interesting mix of search engine, but with a bit more sort of curation and manual work to get those sources in.
Okay, so let's dive into some demos. Putting him on the spot as he's finding the right buttons to click.
The classic.
I've been there. There's a thing called podium time, and it seems to distort the amount of time that is passing. So okay, I'm gonna add this to the stream, and then switch.
And I will ask the obligatory, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, or we'll ask to the audience. Simon R is out there. See, hello, Simon.
Hey, Simon. And I can zoom in a bit. It will hide the lovely images on our homepage, but that's okay. So Openverse, the general idea is that you can search or multimedia at once, which is something fairly unique to us. So this initial view that we show folks is an aggregate of right now audio and images, but ultimately here we'd be showing things like 3D models and those other media types that I mentioned, all in one view. And that's really just intended to kind of show the diversity of the commons and the variety of all these resources. And so yeah, we show our search results. You can load more results. Something we do because our goal really is to surface Creative Commons licensed works is to allow you to go off to external sites that aren't yet included in Openverse but have fantastic open licensed works. So just really trying to reduce that friction for people. Like I'll give a quick shout out to the Center for Aging Better. They have really wonderful stock photography for just showing older individuals living full lives and doing things that people do that are underrepresented in stock photography. So yeah, then I think what Alan mentioned a bit earlier that I really love is we make it very, very easy to correctly credit the creator of works and get that attribution. So we offer it in a couple of formats. You just easily copy and paste it with the press of a button. A quick fun fact, before I ever worked on this project or at Creative Commons, this was the first thing I ever contributed to the project, was just this little text that says copied when you press the button. So it's nice that has followed along. Yeah, and then we surface some metadata about each work. So we have tags and the dimensions, the file type. And then you can also, very importantly, go off and see it at the original source. Because another goal of the project is to highlight repositories of openly licensed works. So we don't actually have a way to directly, download images within Openverse, which does add a little bit of friction for people. But what's also important about that is that you can just really verify the license on the source that you're on. And we have intentions to document that more clearly for people, sort of just how to be a good steward of Creative Commons licensed works. So ultimately, we'd like to do something like provide specific instructions for how to verify the source at all the different sources within Openverse. And I can quickly highlight some of those. We have a sources page on the site where we have a big button for recommending new sources if you know of any directories of open works that we don't include. But also we have this sort of master table of all the sources, how many items we collect from that source, and how to get to it yourself. Just to highlight a very recent example, we just added over 155 million works from iNaturalist, which is a really great community for sharing nature observations. So, it's everything from a phone picture of a plant you saw in your yard to professional nature photographers sharing birds and animals that they observe in the wild. So it's a project we really love, and it was actually one of our community contributors, Rebecca Whittam, who shared that work. So, just someone giving this extraordinary gift to Openverse in their free time. So shout out to her. And yeah, so that's, one more crucial thing that I will mention is, let's see, what's another nice search. Tend to like to use animals for demo searches. Very crucially is the ability to filter results and really narrow down what you're looking for. So you can obviously search for whatever specific Creative Commons license you need for whatever your own requirements are. And again, we try to do sort of an educational piece here by explaining the licenses in a very human readable way. And then just other very detailed filters about, specific qualities of the images, file types, formats, different sources, all of the sources included in Openverse. We intend to kind of group these in the future into some sort of presets. So, if someone's looking for more like stock photography, they could find that. If they're looking for more, I don't know, perhaps archival documents or illustrations, just expose sort of some broader categorization of these sources for people. Something we'd like to do in the long term. And yeah, I think this ability to really dial down what you need for your use case is something fairly unique to us. And the last thing I'll mention before we maybe just chat a bit more and get out of demo land, Openverse is available in a ton of different languages, which is extremely important to us. So just as an example, fully translated into Spanish. And yeah, we have a language dropdown in the footer of the site where you can see, the extent of, it doesn't actually render in the video, which is too bad, but I think we have something like 100 languages, at least partially translated, and something like 20 languages fully translated. And yeah, it's really just, with the goal of increasing access to services like this, where, most of them are only available in English and you have to use the automated browser translations, which are, fraught with problems and inaccurate. So yeah, all of those translations are supplied by community contributors to Openverse and the broader WordPress ecosystem. So yeah, we're also extremely appreciative to them for those. So yeah, I will stop sharing.
Very cool. We'll come back. I know I found, because I bet most people kind of go to they search and they get a bunch of results, and they're largely dominated by Flickr, because wonderfully, which Flickr I love, has so many of the results. But I think knowing that the filters are there can help sometimes, depending what you're looking for. So sometimes I really restrict it to specific museums if I'm looking for cultural artifacts, or thinking about, with all the ones you have from various naturalist sites. So I hope people really pay attention to those filters, as well as, like, sometimes I'm doing a blog post. I know I need a wide image. Well, I can do that. And that when you yes, you can go by license, but if you say you're going to use it commercially, it pre-selects the right licenses. Or if you say I need to change it or to modify it, it selects the right licenses. So that makes the searching really powerful. But I keep urging people, pay attention to the filters and pay attention to the search modifiers, like putting search terms in quotes and excluding. That's how you become a power Openverser.
Yeah, and you may be a pioneer in the field of power Openverse users, but yeah, Flickr is a very interesting case study, because just the sheer variation in quality that exists on Flickr. You have people who have been using it as their sort of personal backup since the early aughts, and they checked that CC license because Flickr does a great job of surfacing the licenses and always has. Then you have these incredibly high quality photographers, and then you also have institutions who choose to open their collections on Flickr. So like NASA has an incredible repository of images on Flickr, and that variance in the quality that can come from Flickr makes it very difficult to prioritize them appropriately in our results. They're also by and large the largest single source of images within Openverse. They probably comprise over 50% of the whole collection. So yeah, kind of working out issues with our results from them to make sure that the best stuff is being surfaced is kind of a big goal of ours for the year.
Can you talk about, like, how are they prioritized in terms of what comes up first?
Yeah. So it's fairly simple as it stands, and we'd like to incorporate many more rankings and factors into this. But Yeah, the primary heuristic is that you search for text, and that text is present in the title, description, or tags of the work. So, very sort of rudimentary, basic search. On top of that, what we do is we actually incorporate popularity data from the sources themselves. So if something's been favorited multiple times, or some sites offer a view count or a download count, we do have some really interesting code that calculates all of that and normalizes it across the distribution of sources, and then applies that. One bug with that right now actually is that by virtue of having a popularity calculation, things are boosted. So even things that are low popularity are currently shown above things with no popularity. So that's something we would love to fix, or would love a community contributor to fix. But yeah, that's really the simplest way to explain how it currently works. Something we're actively pursuing this year is, which has its own trade-offs, and has been explored a bit in the past, but is essentially like machine analysis of the images. So that's when you start veering into this, not the full AI territory that's been the talk of all technologists for the past couple of weeks, but yeah, there are many services that can reliably detect objects, settings, the environment of a photograph. That gets much more challenging in an audio context, because such tools don't really exist. But we're really fortunate that some of the various audiophile communities that most of our audio comes from are really, really good about applying tags. I think there's more of a culture to do so in various audio sites.
Are you trying to add more audio? Because I think there's like
Yes.
3 sources, right?
Yes. Yeah. We are actively working on and outreaching towards some pretty nice names that I'd be very excited to get. If anyone ever
Free Music Archive, Free Music Archive.
Yeah, we've been talking a bit to our dear friend Hessel, but haven't had the opportunity to move forward with that lately. Another one I would love to see is SoundCloud, but we've been dealing with their API has been closed for quite some time, and it's been pretty difficult to get a hold of someone over there. So yeah, if anyone ever sees this and knows someone who works at SoundCloud, that would be phenomenal.
Just a happy user. No, it's fantastic to see. And my real goal, I wanted to meet you, but I just want to get more people aware of this, because I told you in the beginning, like, I think a lot of people get into some gray zones, especially when they're new to open education and trying to find resources. And when you send them to Google and they just filter for Creative Commons, it's the results are questionable as to what you get back. And so here at Openverse, you don't have to worry about that, and it's pretty clear. But as you indicated, like, it's good to go to the source and verify. But I also like that you're going to the source. There's a lot of Google image search results that are places that harvest images from elsewhere. And that really bothers me. Yeah,
it's very difficult to trust the images you're getting from Google. There tends to be this balance with open source things where you're sometimes making a trade-off of quality or ease for these ethical things that you hold over those. So you're always like conceding in some way. And we're really trying to avoid that with Openverse. Like, we're trying to prove like, the right way of doing things can also be the best way, and you don't have to compromise. And I think we're mostly there. I think there's definitely some things we need to improve on. The 2 biggest being some of those relevancy concerns that I mentioned with regards to Flickr, and then also, frankly, especially in the educational realm, there are some content safety issues that we're working out, particularly with the results from Flickr.
I was going to say, because I did a search and I came up with some things about like this might, not anything like terribly offensive, but stuff that you don't want like maybe kids to come across. Or and that's huge for us. And
Yeah, with search terms, there's kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario where if you search for something that is considered sensitive and you get sensitive results, we still want to protect those users by default, and that is a priority. But the most important case to us is places where you search for something completely innocent and innocuous, and you get results that you would never expect to see.
The word embrace. I did something with Embrace, and I got a lot of people embracing their freedom.
Yes. So that's like our most active current initiative, is to actually, it's kind of a rudimentary way of doing it, but our first pass is just going to be matching the textual content of things in Openverse to basically a block list of terms that might be sensitive. And historically, that's an approach that has a lot of problems, but only if you're restricting access to things on those terms. For example, just like a lot of lists historically contain terminology that would affect just like various like gender identity groups and communities. And yeah, we obviously don't want to do that. But in our case, we're not blocking these things. We're just making them opt in. So as sort of brute force as a strategy, that is, it's, we really want to just be safe by default and allow people to ultimately opt in to seeing things maybe that the typical user doesn't want to. So very shortly we should be, in the next couple of months, we'll be bringing back a sensitive toggle in the results, so you can enable to see some of these results, and then by default they'll actually be blurred, so there's still sort of you're consenting in per image to actually go in and look at them.
That's smart.
And then long term, what we intend to do is to have, and I don't see this done in a lot of places. There's a little precedent on Tumblr actually, which is cool, but to just have like very granular categories of what might be sensitive that you can opt into. So if something is maybe a bit more suggestive or maybe more violent, or for example, there's some really good instructive medical imagery on Wikimedia Commons, but that's obviously not to everyone's taste. So just really empowering people to not just broadly not see sensitive things, but decide what is sensitive for them is something we'd really like to do as well.
Good. Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to the random feature.
Yes. Yeah, we'll do that just for you. An API endpoint where you can get a random image great for any image of the day sort of apps or anything like that. So, I should very quickly mention the API, which I'll share the link to, which will be moving to our openverse.org domain in the coming months. But this is just a way for programmers and developers and software engineers to access all of the content in Openverse in your own sites, applications, you can build very robust integrations. There are a few content management systems out there that exclusively use Openverse for their media libraries. We find a lot of like startups will use it to quickly bootstrap their site builder or whatever they're working on with a nice set of default images for people to choose from.
I just noticed a question from Simon.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry we missed that.
That's my fault.
Yeah, I assume this is referring to sort of maybe when I was talking about when we were doing that discovery work to find Creative Commons licensed works. That's also something we're looking into a lot lately. Creative Commons historically actually proposed a standard for this to the W3C, which is the sort of governing body for web standards. Not to get too technical for people, but they had a proposal called CC-REL, which was this basically just a standard format for when you're making a website, which are typically written in or built it with HTML, which is sort of a programming language. That HTML structure would have information about open licensed works directly inside of it. And yeah, that proposal never really took off or was adopted. That's a story for another day. That's part of this semantic web movement that itself never fully took off in many respects. I'm no web historian, but yeah, all of that is to say is there are some newer standards like this, and again, not to get too technical, but schema.org is this standard for metadata on the web, and they have an image format that has its own license fields. Grab that. Yeah, so this is basically just like a way to communicate with computers. It's and represent the works on your site as data. And this has fields for license information, the information about the author, all the kind of metadata that you would expect to find. So there's not really a standard built around that yet for identifying Creative Commons licensed works, but we're very interested in pursuing that line of thinking. And for example, doing something, and we're ways out from this, but doing something where sites could include this metadata on their site, and then basically have a way to tell Openverse, hey, we have all these open licensed works, and then Openverse would pull them automatically. So it would transform the model we have now of needing to identify these sources and manually add them to Openverse or write code to add them to Openverse, and instead just let creators of open licensed works broadcast to Openverse that they exist. And yeah, long term, we're extremely excited for that because it comes with a lot of challenges in terms of moderation and validation of these things, but it's also just a really, really powerful way to empower people who want to give their works to the commons and share them with the world.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it. This has been really exciting, Zach. And we want to send everybody to Openverse and stop going to other places. And where they can, as Zach says, there's places to offer help. And even if you want to join in the Slack channel and ask questions, I can say they're readily responsive. So thanks so much, Zach. It's good to hear you. We're going to give the stage to Paul now. And maybe we can talk about like your project Doxify This, and tell us, like, where did that come from?
Where did that come from? Can I say its origin story is a GitHub issue? What a weird story that would be. So it's true. About maybe 9 months ago, maybe a year ago, there was a comment, an issue on the Doxify GitHub repository. By the way, Doxify, for those who don't know, is a very unique documentation generator that is not generating HTML pages like with build processes like Hugo or Jekyll or anything like this. Doxify is really super unique because it goes directly from Markdown in the back end to a web page with no build process. It's all in the front end using JavaScript. Anyway, Bo Shaw, bless his heart, Bo Shaw wrote on a GitHub issue for Doxify, hey, wouldn't it be cool if somebody could host a version of Doxify that would render Markdown files remotely located? And I saw this issue and I was like, what? Doxify can do this? Like, that is amazing. And so you can find this issue on GitHub with Doxify. And I started engaging Bo to learn a little bit more. I'm not a developer, by the way. I'm basically just a hacker. But this to me was amazing because in the past, and Markdown, I've seen, Alan, as a great format for open educational resources, but there's usually a huge barrier of entry. Like, just tell an instructor, oh, just go create a Jekyll site, get back to me, right? There's a lot of things going on. So, earlier, I've had 2 other attempts at this, trying to bring Markdown to the masses, right? I worked with the Grab CMS, which is a beautiful flat file system, which I love, where content is stored as external files with Markdown. But you got to have a web server. You got to get a PHP version that's not antiquated on a university server. There's all kinds of barriers. So that's fine, but not for everybody. Then I discovered Doxify, And Docsify, you can run in 30 seconds from a GitHub repository, no server, GitHub pages. Okay, looks better. I'm able to kind of get that going a little bit too, but GitHub pages, what folder, configuration, still kind of barrier of use. Bo Shaw says, I can use Docsify to render a file remotely. Oh my gosh, that means you don't even need a website anymore, right? All you need is a single markdown file located publicly accessible, and you can create a website. So that was really the genesis, because it's like, well, what can I do with that? And when you think about it, and I know, Alan, you've gotten into this idea of embedding content in different places. When you're rendering a file that's only in one place that you control the source of, but you can restyle that file every time you render it remotely, you get to some really cool possibilities. And by cool, I mean like useful, of actual content reuse. And if OER is not about content reuse, what is OER about, right? And so anyway, I hope I didn't deviate too much for your question there, but that's a little bit of background of where the project came from. And I'm still discovering myself all the things we can do with just a simple markdown file located somewhere on the web.
Can you share a little bit how you use Docsify in your own work?
Sure. So why don't I start a screen share here?
Perfect.
Here. Okay, so my main use of Docsify is with my course that I teach at Simon Fraser University, which is a UI design course. And I use the Canvas LMS. And I'm going to bring that site up for you. So, you know what? I'll be honest. I mean, actually, Canvas LMS has a lot of good things going for it. I mean, there's some pretty good attributes about form discussions and assignments and things like that that work well. But content is not so great in Canvas. And the problem is, if you want content to die, put it in your LMS, right? Because then it's like, who's going to get that content? The content's going to probably be in a customized HTML format, and it may not be accessible outside the LMS, and all these things. So for me, once I've been embedding content from external sources, like using a Graph CMS earlier, and then using Docsify earlier. But now with Docsify this, I can have a repository of markdown files and render it as you see here. What you see now is Canvas, but the content is from Docsify. This. And so this is my home page. I can go into a module. I'll bring up a module. And because it's using Docsify this, you can do things like adding a dynamic table of contents at a render time via a URL parameter. So I know from my students love the fact now that when they go to weekly modules, they can see this high level index of all the materials and jump to anything that they want. This is all Docsify this, right? So in order to kind of prove that this is Docsify this, here's my resources page. And if I go to the bottom, I'm going to see, I'm going to see an edit this page link. And if I tap on that link, oh, you know where I'm going to go, Alan? I'm going to go to a GitHub repository. Now, you don't have to have that link in your content rendered by Docsify this, but it will automatically do that for you, calculate the right URL, give it as a link. And so in my case, my students are pretty, they're computing science students. They're pretty comfortable with GitHub, let's say. They could actually contribute to the course. So you get into all these interesting areas, like not only content reuse, but content collaboration. Because if your audience is comfortable with editing a file on GitHub, then they can also contribute and collaborate on that file. So you've got all kinds of possibilities. So to loop back to your question, Alan, that's where it really all started, was to use content in Markdown in my own course. And then that's turned into this whole Markdown publishing project that I've got going. What would you like to have me show next, Alan? Do you have anything in particular of interest? Oh, I can't seem to hear you, Alan.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine.
I'm here. Do you want to do like a demo and show like what happens when you put it into the Doxify this site?
Sure. That's a great idea. So let's open up a little file. So this is a markdown file that I've got on GitHub. Okay. So any publicly available markdown file, you can basically render with Doxify this. So this is a markdown file that happens to contain some interesting stuff, right? There's markdown lists, there's like a Java code block, there's like an image, and then there's some other stuff like an embedded iframe, which of course you can't see in the current GitHub markdown presentation, but it's in there. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that URL. Okay, so why don't we track all the steps needed to publish a website or web page with Doxify this? So first step is you get a URL of a markdown file. So I got that. Second step is go to doxifythis.net. So here we are in the web app. By the way, the web app is open source. What's really super cool though is that it's actually open source and you can run your own instance. So if you want to, you could even set up your own customized Doxify this renderer with your own URL so you control everything from start to finish, or you can just use the publicly accessible version to render markdown files. So you see in the middle of the page, we have a web page builder. I'm going to paste that markdown file. Oh, I think we're at step 2, right? Step 2, paste URL. At step 3, you tap the publish a standalone web page, or you could press return. And that's it. And what we have here is a responsive web page created from that markdown file. But you can do all kinds of interesting things beyond just that. So let's go back to our web page builder. Let's say what I'd like to do is I'd like to include and edit this page link, and I'd like to include a table of contents on the right-hand side. I can publish. Now I have my page. I have this really handy edit this page link. It'll take me right to the GitHub file to edit it. And I have this handy generated table of contents on the right-hand side. And if that's still not enough for you, there's a whole bunch of other things you can do, like you can choose your font and your family, you can choose your link color. And these are not random options. Most of these options are aimed at 2 things, okay? 1, so you can style your content at the URL level. I'll show you the URL in a minute. So it better matches your destination platform that you want to embed in. So in other words, you can actually have one piece of content styled multiple ways for multiple destination platforms. And 2, things that you want to kind of enhance being more like a standalone web page. So in other words, we could use a Doxify sidebar, which is a more kind of advanced kind of navigational tool on the left-hand side if we want. We can even set the number of maximum header levels for that. So you can do more things. You can change that text to edit this page. So let's actually reset everything to the default. And let's do a Doxify sidebar, edit this page link, and just take a look at that web page. So here we are. So now we have our web page. We have our edit this page link. We can now, with this more advanced sidebar, hide it and show it. And of course, we can navigate to it. But how is all this happening? It's time to go to the URL bar, right? So if we go to this URL bar, let's take a look at this URL bar. Okay. So what this URL tells us is that we're going to a web page on doxifythis.net. And in the base path, by the way, you don't need to know any of this stuff, right? You can just tap on your web page builder and it does it for you. But if you want to nerd out, like I like to nerd out, you can actually just edit this URL and change how Doxify this presents your web page. So we have base path, which is obviously the path to the GitHub repository you're rendering from. You also then path the fact that you want a sidebar. That sidebar goes true. You also passed what the link is to the GitHub repository for your edit this link page, and then that's it. But let's say you want to change something. Let's say that you are embedding into a platform that uses red links, right? So you could actually add a new item and say link color equals, and I'm just going to put in text because that's what it does. Again, you could use the web page builder to do this. You just pick a color visually, no worries. And here we go. And so now do you notice here, I'm using the red link color. And then down here. So using the web page builder, you don't have to know anything about URLs and parameters. You just point and click to what you want. It'll generate the URL for you, and then you copy paste, use that. But also, if you want to nerd out a little bit, you can tweak that URL in different platforms and different situations and style the content differently.
Maybe a nerdy question, and then
Sure.
we also have a question from the chat we may want to get to. Like, I know the URLs they get pretty long, right? And they're easy to mess up. Would there ever be anything where, like, if you had a builder that would maybe generate all the data as like a JSON file, and then you passed it a simpler parameter? It may create more complexity.
I think it's a fantastic idea. What I've run up against, though, is, and this also happened to me with CSS styling, is that because of browser security issues, certain things are not permitted. And so, because originally I was also trying to be able to link an external style sheet, right? So that being said, right now it doesn't look like it's possible. So the URLs are longer, but you can do things to help people. So for instance, I know there's another question. I'll be quick here. For instance, if my fellow SFU instructors would like to do this, because I'm doing a presentation next week at SFU about this tool in Canvas. You can set up your own instance of Docsify. This is the SFU instance, where you put in a URL and you just publish a standalone web page. Now, take a look at the URL that is generated. So because I'm using a customized instance, I can default and add custom font families, custom line heights, and font sizes. So for a faculty member, they don't need to know anything of that stuff. All they need to know is where I go to enter in my URL, and it can automatically then configure it. So it's not what you're looking for, Alan. I appreciate that. But it's kind of in that vein of where you're trying to make it simpler, right? For people to kind of get a set of customization parameters without errors, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, URL shorteners to make them prettier and all that stuff. So
yes, indeed. Yeah.
I think you kind of got to where I think Ian was asking, like, what does it take to set up a custom Docsify?
Oh, so a custom Docsify. Oh, okay.
Like to do what you did at SFU, right? If you
right. Sure. Yeah. So let's go over to Docsify. And let's sneak over to the bottom of the page. I think I have I do have this. Okay, so basically, if you want to set up your own Docsify, you would be able to, I'm not signed into GitHub right now, but you'd be able to clone this repository. So that's one step. Clone the repository. 2, once you've cloned that repository, you enable GitHub pages on that repository. And basically, once you do that, you are running Docsify this with your own URL. You can go in and customize your CSS, your default, and then you use that URL to then generate your pages. And I use something quite similar to that with, if we go back here, sorry. If I go here, I'll actually show you. Here is my SFU Docsify this instance. And so this is what I just showed you. This is basically just a fork from Docsify this, so I can then customize it.
So it's still running from GitHub. You basically fork it. And I guess if you want a custom domain, then you just, do a pointer to it.
Yeah. And by the way, you don't need to run it on GitHub. You can actually, I also have a version running on my own web server. So it is portable that way. But of course, I'm just running on GitHub as much as possible because they have a really great server uptime and it works so well because it's not using PHP. It's just a JavaScript front end, which again, it is amazing that's possible.
Right. Excellent. Well, maybe show us some more demos. And
Sure,
I like
sure.
that new front page thing. That's brand new, right?
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, so, Doxify, again, Doxify is such an awesome project. It's almost got 30,000 stars right now, and I'm hoping this project kind of brings it out to even more people. Doxify supports a cover page, which is a really nice feature, kind of gives you a more graphical front end for your website, and then you can go into your pages. So let's take a look at the publishing with Doxify this guide, because when I thought, well, I should write a guide to help people publish with Doxify this, of course I thought, well, what better way to use Doxify this to publish the guide? So here we go. So this is using Doxify this to explain publishing with Doxify this. So this is a nice front end page. Now, of course, now that we know we can zoom into that URL, let's take a look at that URL. Lots of stuff going on with this one. We've got a sidebar, we've got an edit link, we've got a sidebar with 3 levels of navigation, and we're using a cover page that we passed. So lots of things happening with that. And it gets us this presentation. So I can tap on read the guide. And now I have a nice presentation of what's marked down and publishing with Doxify this, and even showing, for instance, some HTML of, a URL and using it as a embedded iframe. I think I have an example. Here we go. Embedded iframe in Canvas, and a little bit about GitHub. So this is a online site generated by Doxify this. Yep, about Doxify this. So that's meta in many ways, right?
We just Googled recursion.
We did. And what else? Well, actually, Alan, I'm sure you'd recognize these things down here. So, this is your own TrueWriter site, hosted on WordPress. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then as we scroll down, we see that you have using Doxify this to embed a list of all the TrueWriter sites that you've seen in action. So this is coming directly from GitHub. And there's even an edit this page link I see you included. I also note that you've changed the link color, so it matches the link color of your WordPress site.
Yeah.
And if we tap on this link, you'd even be able to then directly edit that, in GitHub. So I'm going to turn the tables on you, Alan. So how did you find that experience of, being able to take GitHub content and then, render it and put it where you want it?
It was handy. These are some custom WordPress themes that I've been working on for quite some time. And I had a terrible long README document, a single one, that had documentation, and it had a list of examples, and it just was one of those things that grew by accretion. But what also, and so I have chunked it out a little bit. So the examples are now their own page, which allowed me to embed that in an information site. But the real beauty that I wanted to do was inside my WordPress theme. There's an options page, and I used to embed my my README documentation on how to use all the features. And what I had to do is I had to export Markdown, convert it to HTML, and include that in my theme. And so the internal documentation was usually behind. So what Doxify allowed me to do was to clean up the documentation into its own URL. So it has a standalone link you can point to, but I can also embed it into my WordPress theme through an iframe. And this means that it's always up to date. It's always the current version documentation. So there's like multiple ways that I was able to do things. And now all I have to do is clean up a lot of my GitHub content.
Don't we all? So I can relate with you there. And in fact, I took a page of your playbook with my Doxify this README, because I've been able to then use Doxify this with the Doxify README to create a front end of my documentation. And this is the great thing, Alan, that I'm also finding, is that I've only have one source of truth with this content now, right? I've got this README on GitHub, but all of a sudden it's free here, right? And I could further embed it in something else if I want to, but I can also just pass this little URL and let people view this, and it looks like it's a full website documentation about Doxify this, but really it's just the README re-rendered, right?
And I'm thinking like a lot of our use cases we're publishing and sharing information, but like I'm thinking instructional setting where you may have students working on a shared project where the code or whatever writing they're developing based in GitHub can be reused and displayed in so many multiple places, and then it would always change as the students are working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. And I'm also hoping, and maybe I am being too optimistic, but through these successive open source projects I've been working on with Markdown, I'm hoping now I've got a low enough barrier of use that someone, if they're brave enough to go to GitHub, get an account, and make a file, they could actually start publishing responsive web pages and share them and even collaborate with them. But we'll have to see how that develops. But that's my hope, is that now that the barrier of use is further decreased for folks just to get into Markdown publishing, because as you know, if you get into it, then as their skills grow, they could outgrow Docsify this, which by the way is awesome to see them leave home, right? And maybe they move to their own Jekyll site, or maybe they move to Dockersaurus, or maybe they move to something else, and that's awesome. But maybe to help them get going, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic to see and watch, and it's good to know. I didn't know that Docsify this itself ran on GitHub, and so one of my questions was like, what about the load on this server?
Indeed, yeah, and I've been, GitHub Pages has a pretty amazing uptime.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like a natural. But I have been running a mirror. In fact, if you go to the Docsify this GitHub repo, you'll see a Netfly URL there too as a mirror. Because the cool thing is, if you're doing that presentation of your lifetime and you're using Docsify this, and for some reason GitHub Pages is down, you could actually just use the Netfly server and render your content, right? Because things happen and you never know. But because the presentation engine is separate from where the content is being stored, you can actually even use different renderers of the same content. And also, not to get too off track, but that's another really important conceptual piece, I think, of this, is that the instructor or the publisher has their own content on their own account, on their own server, on their own whatever it is, and all Docsify this is doing is rendering it from their own location. I'm never uploading a duplicate of their own content or anything like that.
Right.
So anyway, that's another goal of the design.
Well, this has been really exciting. This is like, it's nice to do a techie session. Not that I don't mind the discussion things, but I like to do the tech, just like, and I can't believe you call yourself a hacker. My God, Paul, I think you're way ahead of me. But.
Well, you're too kind, but no, I'm a hacker. But I have to say, and by the way, Zach, I love what you showed as well with Openverse, and searching for open content is something that I myself also have been doing. I have a question for you if I got time, Alan.
Please.
But one thing that I haven't quite found a good way to do is, and maybe it's because I'm doing something that's unusual, is trying to find open content that's using Markdown. Like, does may either of you have a hint or a tip for me to do that? Because that really, I find, helps me repurpose and reuse that content.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I personally generate a lot of openly licensed Markdown in all of our own documentation. Yeah, I guess an initial guess would be that maybe you could, I believe in GitHub's search user interface, you can search by license and file type. So it might be interesting to look at, and again, this is just the archivist and content aggregator and me speculating, but you might be able to use that to, and then you can sort the results by popularity and all of their various sorting methods. That might give you a list of at least Markdown documents that are openly licensed. There'd be a lot of readmes fundamentally, so the value isn't the highest thing. But yeah, maybe you could also play with like some filtering there to weed out files named readme, for example. So
sure. Okay, good tip. Thank you. Yeah, I'll give that a go. Anyway, that was just an aside.
Yeah, but but to mess things up, there's a lot of things out there on GitLab, and I know, some open source people are like not happy with GitHub because of its owner.
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
you know.
I can understand that too. And recently, I've actually been exploring Codeberg, I think it's called, and
Okay.
I find it's a really nice open kind of source version of Git with a web service. So anyway, but yeah, some great stuff going on there in Git in general for sure.
Yeah.
There's some really lovely GitHub alternatives that are, even open source. Source Hut comes to mind. Source Hut actually calls itself the Hacker's Forge.
Oh my gosh, I still have stuff on SourceForge.
You want to conflate everything old is new with software, especially names.
That's beautiful.
Source Hut is great, and it has a very user-friendly interface, a bit more minimalist than GitHub. So we would love to mirror everything on Openverse over there at some point.
Yeah,
you go ahead, Alan.
No, you can go look at this. I'm just going to screen share something really quick.
Thanks for sharing, Zach, the URL from Ben Shaw. Or Bo Shaw. That's right. Yeah, that's the story right there for me. And super cool to see that you tried Docsify this with some Openverse.
Okay.
Markdown.
Yeah, I was just going to share that because while we're talking.
Great.
So I threw in. We have a contributing guide for Openverse, just showing folks of all different levels of technical knowledge how to contribute to the project. Whether it's translations or code or testing it. So threw it in there, and it looks fantastic. So
very
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, what better way to end than a little conversion of our two
I love it. Like I couldn't dream of a better ending. So thank you both for joining me. It was brilliant to talk with you, and I definitely will be crossing paths again. There'll be a little bit of an outro video here, and then we'll be gone. So thanks again. Good to see you, Paul and Zach.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.